And now to the other big story this evening, and that is the Fed. The central bank lowered interest rates again and pointed to a possible halt on further rate cuts. But the Fed chief did more than that. He also hinted about when the next rate hike might come, and that helped lift the stock market. The Dow Jones Industrial Average rose 115 points to 27,186. The Nasdaq added 27, and the S&P 500 was up 9 to an all-time high. Steve Liesman has more from Washington.
The Federal Reserve met market expectations and cut interest rates by a quarter point. Its third cut this year. The new range of the Fed's overnight lending rate is now 1.5 to 1.75%. But Fed Chairman Jerome Powell signaled that the rate-cutting exercise is likely over for now.
We think that the current stance of policy is likely to remain appropriate, as long as incoming information about the economy is broadly consistent with our outlook, which is a positive one of moderate economic growth, strong labor market, and inflation moving close to 2%.
Concerns over the trade war and global economic weakness were behind the cut now, but Powell suggested the Fed had provided a lot of help to the economy already, and that seems like enough. In its statement, the Fed dropped the critical phrase from prior announcements that it would, quote, act as appropriate. That had been a signal to markets that future rate cuts were coming. That's gone now. Instead, the Fed says it will, quote, assess the appropriate path of the funds rate, and that means the Fed is likely on hold for a while. So what would it take for the Fed to resume cutting? Powell said the economic data would have to come in much weaker than the Fed expects. And Powell also provided positive news to markets by suggesting the Fed is far from potentially hiking interest rates.
I think we would need to see a really significant move up in inflation that's persistent before we even consider raising rates to address inflation concerns.
There were two dissents to the statement, both by Fed bank presidents who did not want to cut rates. But presumably after 3 rate cuts and now a Fed that's on hold, the committee might be less divided now. For Nightly Business Report, I'm Steve Liesman in Washington.